Good evening, America, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Just the News, Not Noise. I'm your host, John Solomon, reporting to you, as always, from Washington, D.C. My amazing co-host, Amanda Head, well, she's working on the opposite coast, and she joins us now. Hello, Amanda.
Hello, John, and good evening, everyone. I am your co-host, Amanda Head, reporting to you from right here in sunny Los Angeles, California. And before we get to discussing all of the latest FBI whistleblower news that we broke here last night with Harvard Law Professor Emeritus Alan Dershowitz later in the show, to borrow a song from Olivia Newton-John and update it for 2022's highly politicized environment, let's get political. Now, as Hurricane Ian heads towards the Florida coast in aggressive fashion, Governor Ron DeSantis has still not heard from the Commander-in-Chief, President Joe Biden. And despite their political and ideological differences, President Biden has made time to reach out to several mayors in the Sunshine State, but not to the governor himself. Odd. And speaking of governors, you may remember back in 2017, California prohibited state-funded travel to Texas after the state enacted laws that California claimed didn't align with the LGBT community. You know, like the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida that didn't have the word gay anywhere in the legislation. However, in true Gavin Newsom fashion, the French Laundry during COVID diner was just caught traveling to the Lone Star State to blast Republican policies in the city of Austin despite the governmental restrictions. I guess this was a valid reason to break the travel rules, just like the Super Bowl was a valid reason for LA Mayor Eric Garcetti to ignore the mask mandates. John?
I'm shocked. Good for thee, not for me. One more time, huh, California? Yeah. That could be the new state slogan out there, Amanda. I don't know. Yeah. Well, listen, we've had so much news breaking on this whistleblower front. We now know of the very serious concerns that Special Agent Stephen Friend had. We've now learned and confirmed that his wife was censored from Facebook after he was suspended from his job for raising concerns about the treatment of January 6th committee defendants, or January 6th defendants and suspects. And our first guest knows a lot about the FBI, about its warts, its problems, and he's been working hard over the last few years to fix it, going all the way back to the Russia collusion scandal. He is a great congressman from the state of Arizona. Andy Biggs, Congressman, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks, John. Good to see you and Amanda.
Great to have you on, sir. I want to start with the latest revelations about this agent, Stephen Friend. He says that they were weaponizing the use of SWAT teams to go after January 6th defendants for shock and awe, even though they were charged with just misdemeanors. Very concerned, he says, about the security implications of hauling out that hardware, creating a hard entry into a home for a misdemeanor offense. When you hear that, after all the other things you now have ascertained about the FBI, what first comes to mind?
Well, just a recurring theme of abuse of power for political purposes. I mean, to take a SWAT team to a misdemeanor is absolutely ridiculous. Misdemeanors, just so people understand what a misdemeanor is, a misdemeanor would be like someone with a simple trespass. Even some DUIs are misdemeanors, or a shoplifting or something like that. And that's what you have here. And you're going out with these massive SWAT teams to intimidate not just the specific, but the general. So you're intimidating the specific individual who you want to bring under arrest for a misdemeanor, for Pete's sakes. But you also want to cower, cause everybody else that's looking to generally be afraid to speak out, to participate, and cross the line. That is not the way you use a SWAT team. A SWAT team is meant for a very tactical situation that you don't have in these misdemeanors. So, John, Amanda, this is just a recurring theme of abuse of power by the FBI, DOJ, and the federal police apparatus.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's a scary message that I feel like they are trying to send. I want to shift over to border topics. Breaking news, you are one of those folks in Arizona, but especially representing your state on Capitol Hill, who is a border hawk, and I know that the people of your state appreciate that. Talk to us about this new documentary, Alien Invasion, and how it highlights what's happening at the border, and also renews calls to impeach DHS Secretary Mayorkas.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. So I've been down to the border so many times. I've taken so many members of Congress, and when they get down to the border, it changes their very attitude about what they think. they knew about the border, and they become very intent. They're converts. And that's what we're trying to do, so people can really see the truth. The left stream media doesn't show it. You guys show it. Others on the right show it. But we decided to take and put this documentary together of what we saw happening and what we continue to see happening, so that anybody would have the opportunity to see it. So we're going to premiere that this Thursday in Washington, D.C. And then after that, it will be available for free on my congressional website, because we want the world to see what's happening, because it's a danger to you. And Amanda, in L.A., you know this as well. And now even in Washington, D.C., you're seeing the impacts of this. 1 million fentanyl pills seized just the other day in Phoenix. 1 million fentanyl pills, 40%, according to DEA, going to have basically a fatal dose of fentanyl in it. And that's just the beginning of the disaster that we see because of Joe Biden, but particularly Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, who's supposed to be in charge of the border.
Yeah, and do you think I mean, obviously people in the border states want Mayorkas out. Do you think now, as the crisis from the border has spread to every state in the form of fentanyl, sex trafficking, child trafficking, that there are enough Republicans and perhaps even some Democrats willing to vote for impeachment of the Homeland Security Secretary?
Well, I think you'd get a unanimous verdict out of the Republicans. I can only think of a couple of Democrats that might be inclined to vote for an impeachment. And they would receive so much pressure from Speaker Pelosi. That's why this has to take place in January when we have a new speaker.
Yeah, so important. Yep.
Yeah, Congressman, I wanted to ask you specifically about the fentanyl issue, because I think for a lot of us, we witnessed during the opioid crisis a lot of callousness from a certain sector of American society, because they would look at the opioid crisis and say, oh, well, these people are drug addicts. They shouldn't have been taking those pills to begin with. And I see that pervasive attitude a little bit coming forth with fentanyl. But a story John and I were talking about 2 or 3 weeks ago, a school supervisor in California who caught a student with a bottle of it, just opened the jar and smelled it and ended up in the hospital. How do we get more people to not be calloused against this and to look at it with broad eyes and a broad perspective and realize that this affects everybody? It's not just drug addicts and people who are closely related to it or people who are at the border.
Well, we have to keep the discussion going, because what's happening, you're exactly right, Amanda and John, what happens here is you might think that you're taking a Percocet or something like that, and it's not. It's going to be a counterfeit pill that has a lethal dose of fentanyl. We've seen people that have actually tried to help individuals who were having an overdose, and they wanted to get up there, and they have died just by ingesting the fentanyl dust on that individual. So you really have to understand how deadly fentanyl is. It just takes just a few grains actually to kill somebody. And you don't have to be a drug addict. You don't have to be some, ne'er-do-well. You can be a good Samaritan. You can be, in this case, a school administrator. You can be somebody who just comes in contact with a fentanyl pill or fentanyl powder, and it could be very deadly to you.
Yeah, such an amazing tragedy. And I heard from an officer today, there was a woman that went to a hotel room. Apparently a pill was left on the ground. She picked it up just to clean up the hotel room and was instantly poisoned and sick and had to get an emergency injection in a hotel room. It's just insane. One of the things, Congressman, that I know you work on, you not only highlight the problem at the border, you're trying to create constructive solutions. You've introduced new legislation to end catch and release. Tell us why that's so important.
Well, the catch and release program is really an incentive for people to come into the country. So what it means is you come into the country, you surrender, and that's what most people do today. We take them into custody, and what happens is they then go ahead and say, look, I want asylum. And so we will then release them into the country. We've caught them, now we're releasing them. And the current date for a court case on an asylum claim is 86 months. That's 7 years. That means that you're going to release somebody in for 7 years. You will never see them again. And those who we do encounter that do come back, or that we find, 90% plus have bogus asylum claims. And so we've got to stop that incentive to come. So that's what's happening now to people all over the world that want to come into the country. They know that if they can come over, they could just say, hey, I want asylum, and you're going to be released into the interior of the United States and probably never hear from authorities again.
Yeah, rule of law is non-existent at the border right now, unfortunately. I wanted to close off with something very quickly. We've got about a minute left. I wanted to ask you about this abortion law. An Arizona judge lifted that injunction, basically lifting the abortion law. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Does it reflect the sentiment of voters of Arizona?
Well, it's an old law, I mean, for sure, because, I mean, even the injunction was issued in the early 70s due to Roe v. Wade. So that got lifted, and the previous law goes back in place. That law's an old law, and it provides only an exception for the life of the mother. So whether that is reflective of Arizona or not, we'll find out, because in the next legislative session, the state legislature is going to take that up, and they'll have to take that up.
Yeah, important stuff.
Fantastic.
Go ahead, Amanda. I'm sorry.
Congressman Biggs, we always appreciate having you on, and we are going to check out that documentary. I won't be in D.C. to watch it live there for that first event, but I will definitely be checking it out online. And I encourage everyone to go find it out there. Alien Invasion is what it's called, so everybody go support that and find out with your own eyes what's happening down there, because a lot of people don't get to see it unless they watch shows like ours. Congressman Biggs, thank you so much, and we will be right back after these commercials.
Welcome back, everybody. Joining us now is one of the most important voices in both the court of law and the court of public opinion, a voice of reason, a voice of principle, and the author of, I think, my favorite book of the year, The Price of Principle. Why? Because it tells the story of why standing behind your principles, you can be canceled in today's culture. It's insane. He is none other than Alan Dershowitz. Professor Dershowitz, good to have you on the show.
Good to be on your show. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us by phone. I want to ask you quickly, we've had a lot of stories in the last few days about this whistleblower. Now, it's one whistleblower. Yep. It's one set of allegations. We need to check into them. But he lays out a very serious concern that the FBI has weaponized the use of tactical teams, SWAT teams, to go arrest people on misdemeanors and to do other things that he says violate not only the FBI manual, but the constitutional rights of some of these January 6th defendants. When you hear that, what thoughts run through your mind?
That we're in a tragic situation today where we find that it's the liberals, the civil libertarians, former ACLU members, who are standing behind these incredibly oppressive mechanisms that the FBI is selectively using and weaponizing, this time against Republicans. And the reason I'm so concerned as a liberal Democrat, somebody who used to be on the national board of the ACLU, is, of course, once these tactics are accepted and precedents are established, they can be used against anybody. They can be used against you and me. They can be used against the left. They can be used against people in the Democratic administration when the Republicans come to power. That's the way banana republics begin. You know, in a banana republic, if you lose an election, you lose your freedom. And that's a danger that's going on now with efforts to try to criminalize everything that Trump did, everything his associates did. I'm now representing Mike Lindell. He's selling pillows. And yeah, he's making statements which I disagree with, but the idea of tracking him down at a Hardee's and taking his phone away from him, that's not the way it should happen in America.
Yeah, so true.
And that's why everyone should go check out your book, The Price of Principle. But I wanted to ask you about something else that I think is observably dangerous. This was something John and I were discussing yesterday, the fact that not only the FBI but also the DOJ seems to be infected with many more legal political activists than it used to be. Every once in a while you would have one of these folks, but the DOJ, our legal system, surely seems to have a lot of these young activist lawyers. Do you agree?
Yes, and what's happening is law schools are turning him out, colleges are turning him out, and you know, when I taught at law school for 50 years, I never expressed my opinions about anything. I didn't want to teach my students what to think. I wanted to teach them how to think. And that's no longer happening in law schools. It's no longer happening around the country. And of course, we're turning out lawyers who are doctrinaire and polemical and ideological. And the current view in law school is that Trump and his associates are so bad, and this is so different than anything we've ever experienced before, that the Constitution is not relevant, that we should change the Constitution, abandon the Constitution. People don't know history. They don't know that they said that when we detained 110,000 Japanese Americans. They don't know that people said that when they passed the Alienist Edition Acts, when Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus. It's always been different, but we've always maintained our Constitution. And now I worry that civil libertarians and the guardians, the traditional guardians of the Constitution, the ACLU, are behind these repressive measures, and if not behind them, certainly silent.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. I want to talk to you about a tactic that we're learning a lot more about in the law enforcement community. It goes beyond just the politicalization and weaponization of law enforcement. It's a real interesting civil rights issue. Police departments and the FBI have been buying the geolocation data of Americans without a warrant and essentially tracking them to solve cases, to track people that are suspicious. Yes, it happened with January 6th, but it's happened with murder defendants. It's happened with fraud defendants. The idea that the government could get your data from a data broker and track your entire life pattern from your phone without a warrant. Do you have any concerns about where that's headed in America right now?
Great concerns. I mean, the only reason we permit private people to track you for business purposes is because we assume that it won't end up in government hands. If the government wanted to do the same thing, they'd need a warrant. I mean, I mentioned they tracked Michael Lindell. He was at hunting with his friends, and he was at Hardee's. How do they find him? Did they buy data, or did they have a GPS on him, or did they track his cell phone? Whatever it is, I'm at the opera now, waiting to go in to see opening night at the Metropolitan Opera. I don't want the government to know that. Now they do, because I disclosed it on your wonderful show. But I don't want the government knowing where I go for my entertainment, who I'm with. I'm with my beautiful, fantastic wife. But what if I warrant? I mean, or what if somebody else warrant? It's just too much Big Brother. And the connections now between private industry and the government is becoming one of the great issues of the 21st century. Google and Facebook, and whether or not Google and Facebook have to take instructions from the government. I'm a big supporter of vaccinations for COVID, but I'm not a big supporter of the government telling Facebook that they have to ban people who have different points of view. I mean, the greatness of America has always been different points of view, nuance, calibration, complexity. That's what democracy should be about, not single-minded solutions. People are so sure they know the truth today that they don't think dissent is necessary or due process is necessary. And that's the death of democracy.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, and Alan, another arena where we are seeing a very uncomfortably close tie between the DOJ and now social media. We had the FBI whistleblower's attorney on yesterday, Jason Foster, and we were talking to him about the Steve Guest's wife, whose Facebook page was taken down. Now, she doesn't post anything publicly. It's just her messages. So we've got this situation now. We are creeping so close to what you were talking about, Big Brother. Does it get worse before it gets better, or do you think the pendulum is finally going to swing?
I hope the pendulum will swing. I think this Supreme Court, by the way, both the liberals and the conservatives, because this is not a liberal-conservative issue. This is an issue of civil liberties that ought to be equally applicable to all. I think this court may put an end to it. It's putting an end to a lot of excesses and extremes like, racial affirmative action and some other things. I think that it certainly has to deal with the issue of the relationship between government and private social media, which is so dominant today in the world. Does the First Amendment apply to Google exactly in the same way it applies to the New York Times? These are hard questions, and I think this court is going to have to deal with them sooner or later.
Yeah, and Alan, we got about a couple minutes left. I want to ask this. While the ACLU and some of the traditional civil libertarians have kind of stepped out of the debate, in some cases they're sanctioning the current approach that we're taking. Yeah. There's a whole new generation of civil libertarians coming up through FIRE and other things. In a funny way, there's a rejuvenation of the civil liberties movement, but under different banners and under different circumstances. Why is that important, and what can we do to foster that conversation?
I completely agree. FIRE has become a really important organization. It's picked up from the ACLU. The ACLU doesn't dare to go on campuses and defend conservative students and speak out against censorship by the left on college campus. And FIRE has picked that up. And it's been so successful on college campuses that it's now extended itself, and it's taken over a lot of what the ACLU used to do. The irony is that conservatives today, genuine conservatives, I'm not talking about the crazies on the right, the neo-Nazis and the fascists, real genuine conservatives, the Bill Buckley conservatives, the John Solomon conservatives, these are people who today are taking over the responsibility for defending civil liberties from what used to be liberals and the Democrats and leftists and members of the ACLU. It's a very important development.
It's pretty remarkable. We got about 30 seconds left. You have a 51st book coming out. It's amazing. Tell us what your topic's going to be.
Well, the 51st book is called, we don't know the title yet, Who Shall Live and Who Shall Die? Today is Rosh Hashanah, and we say that prayer every day.
Right.
On Rosh Hashanah, Who Shall Live and Who Shall Die? But the book's about how the law deals with death and life decisions.
Wow.
Ranging from abortion to wars to gun control to capital punishment to assisted suicide, anything dealing with death and life. I put them all together in a little book. Yeah.
Can't wait to read that. All right, Alan, thanks so much. We're heading off a commercial break. Great to have you on, folks. We'll be back right after these messages. Welcome back, America. I'm proud to say that my home state, the great Commonwealth of Virginia, is ground zero for the parents' rights movement in America. We saw that with Governor Glenn Youngkin's extraordinary victory last year. And right now, our next guest is in the forefront of leading that charge to return power back to parents. She is the 26th Superintendent of Public Instruction in Virginia, Jillian Balow. Superintendent, great to have you on.
Hey, thanks for having me on, John, Amanda.
So, Superintendent, we've seen some protests today in Loudoun County, just a little away from my home. But there's a great misnomer about this. A lot of people think that the policies that are being protested or have been reversed were in all the school districts. But my understanding is most of the school districts, they never implemented these policies in the first place. Am I right about that?
Yeah, as we understand, about 10% of the school divisions across the Commonwealth implemented the previous guidelines that were provided by the previous administration. And so that leaves about 90% of the school divisions that use their own or a varied version of another policy.
These school transgender policies, I mean, this is something that I feel like nobody was really having conversations about 10, 15, 20 years ago. For people like you and policymakers, people who are intimately involved in education and curriculum, how difficult is it to navigate that? I would imagine that's probably one of the hardest things you've done with your tenure in education.
Yeah, so that's, first of all, a great question. And oftentimes reporters, journalists, parents, lots of folks ask, what's the most important issue in education? And the answer is pretty simple. Every issue is important in education. And today, this is really important in education, and we must address it. Almost every issue in education also does not have a black or white, yes or no answer. It's complicated. It's grayish most days, and this is no exception. So we'll continue navigating through it together, but really the guidelines, the 2022 policies really boil down to two things. Number one, making sure that we protect and respect the dignity of students, all students. We want schools that are free from discrimination, from intolerance, from bullying, and from harassment. And schools have an obligation, a legal obligation to address any instances of discrimination or harassment or bullying immediately. And that includes every single student. The second part of the policies is really centered around parents, and parents being the primary decision makers and the primary adults who are involved in students' lives, not schools, not the state.
Yes, such an important concept. I want to ask a little bit, in the last segment we had the great law professor Alan Dershowitz on, and he said one of the concerns he has about education, top to bottom, is educators have moved from teaching children how to think to what to think, and that's been the real indoctrination point in education. What is Virginia doing to make sure those things don't happen, that kids are learning how to learn, how to think, but not what to think?
Well, first of all, the mention of Alan Dershowitz just has me a little starstruck, and those are big shoes to fill. So I hope I'm worthy. The second thing is, we heard Governor Youngkin on the campaign trail over the course of the last year, and since he got into office in January, talk about the very same thing. We want students to learn the history of America. We want them to learn about life, the good and the bad, but we want to teach them in a way that teaches them how to think, not what to think. And that's vitally important. Now, these model policies don't touch on classroom instruction or curriculum or standards. They're really, again, more about the dignity and protection of every student in school.
Yeah, so important.
Yeah, I mean, we all, I think, grew up in a time when you went to college, you were faced with opposing ideas, and that was kind of the point of college, but it doesn't seem like that's what they want to create as far as the culture on college campuses these days. I wanted to ask you about these 2022 model policies, because one of the things that you address very directly is privacy. And I think for a lot of people, when they hear student privacy, there are concerns, because we have been hearing so many stories lately about students who may or may not have ever even expressed any curiosity about another gender or gender fluidity, and then they go to a school counselor, and then the school counselor says, don't say anything to your parents. We're going to address this here at school. With respect to privacy within that 2022 model policies, what do you mean there? What all is entailed there?
Yeah, so a couple of things. And number one is that oftentimes issues like this and many other issues that teenagers go through are some of the most difficult decisions and times that they go through in their entire lives. We want to make sure that this is a yes and response, right? We want there to be a nice support system at school and in the community with the different resources that are available. But those decisions and those difficult conversations really should happen first and foremost in the home. And so as soon as the school or the state enters the picture and says, don't tell your parents, we want there to be a really good reason for that, such as the student is going to be harmed or abused. We've had safeguards that are, in law for years. We've reiterated those in this policy. If a student is going to be harmed or abused as a result of informing parents, then there's a different protocol to follow. But I have yet to meet a parent who doesn't want to be part of that major decision and other major decisions in their child's lives. And we should give them that option and provide support for students as students and families as they navigate through some of these difficult times. The other safeguard, I guess, that I don't know if it's a safeguard. Well, it is a safeguard, but it's also a law that's been on the books for years and that we've reiterated in this guidance is that if there is a legitimate cause for concern, that a school, an educator, is a mandatory reporter if they suspect abuse or neglect is taking place at home. So that means that if there is an inherent risk to the student and that's being acted out at home, that we want to make sure that that's addressed and that's reported. That's been on the books for years, and schools are mandatory reporters for that. The third thing is, and I believe that 36 times in the model policy, the word bullying appears. We want every single student protected from harassment, discrimination, bullying, and tolerance. We expect every single educator and every single school to immediately and swiftly deal with instances of harassment, discrimination, bullying, or intolerance. And so that is inherent in the policies, and that protects the privacy and safety of all students.
Common sense thing. That's why so many parents are excited to see what you're doing. Superintendent, a great honor to have you on the show today. Thanks for bringing us up to speed on these very important issues. Folks, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more news right after this commercial break.
Welcome back, everybody. Our next guest is a foreign policy expert, having served as an aide to former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher to now leading the charge at the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom as the director. Niall Gardner joins us now. Niall, it's wonderful to have you back again.
It's my pleasure. Many thanks, Amanda. Thank you.
Now, while I would love to spend the entire segment talking about the Iron Lady, I actually would like to skip over to another European country, Italy. Now, the description that I have seen of their new leader, I believe I've seen far right, I've seen fascist, a whole host of descriptors about her, but none of them seem right. Could you please clarify for us, is she a fascist or a far right leader?
Well, thank you very much for hosting this discussion today. And I have to say, with regard to Giorgia Meloni, she's no fascist. She's not a far-right figure. In fact, if you look at her policies and ideas, they are mainstream conservative views. They're very similar, actually, to the views of US Republicans or British conservatives. The party that Meloni belongs to or leads, the Brothers of Italy, is actually part of the European Conservatives and Reformists group in the European Parliament, which actually sits with allies such as the Law and Justice Party in Poland. The British Conservatives used to be part of this group in the European Parliament. And Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, sent her warm congratulations to Giorgia Meloni just yesterday. And so this idea that in Italy is returning to the days of Mussolini and fascism is just complete and utter nonsense, really. And the platform that Meloni is putting forward, basically secure borders, a strong defense of the family and traditional Christian culture, and also she's standing up to the European Union as well. She's supporting free market policies. These are very mainstream views that you will find in a lot of conservative parties in Europe, and especially you would find them very strongly supported in, for example, the British Conservative Party, which is in power in the United Kingdom. So all of this talk from the left that this is a far-right fascist, government coming to power is complete and utter nonsense. And with good reason, 44% of the Italian population has voted for Giorgia Meloni and for her coalition partners, because they are fed up with decades of left-wing liberal control in Italy. They want to have secure borders. They want to have strict immigration control. They want to have conservative cultural policies which defend the traditional family, and they want to reject the kind of far left woke ideology that has swept into Europe from the United States, frankly, and is being promoted by the Biden administration. So we are looking here at a political revolution in Italy, and I think it's a game changer, because the balance of power in Europe is shifting away from France and Germany, the core powers of the European Union. So this is another conservative revolution that we're seeing in Europe at the moment.
Yeah, it really
Okay, good.
is.
So she's not Mussolini 2.0. Whew, that's what I've heard.
That's for sure.
Yeah, glad we got that off the table. That's good.
Yeah.
It is kind of amazing to watch the EU experiment now creating an extraordinary boomerang. People in Europe seem to be as tired of these far left policies as we're beginning to see in most states in the United States. Is the European Union, at least as a liberal globalist, a powerhouse, beginning to put itself in reverse gear a little bit?
I would say the EU is in serious decline. And, you look at the comments in advance of the Italian election from Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the European Commission. And she made threats basically against Italy, saying that if the results turned out in the wrong way, there would be consequences for the Italians, and there are measures in place that the EU can implement. And so, this is the European Union today, fundamentally anti-democratic, no respect for national sovereignty, in very deep-seated economic decline. And you are seeing a big pushback against the EU from Eurosceptic governments. Not only the new Italian incoming government, but also, of course, the Polish government, the Hungarian government, the Swedish government has moved to the right as well. A new conservative administration heading into Sweden. Also, you're seeing the rise of Eurosceptic, political parties in Spain also. And so across the European Union, you're seeing a growing rejection of what the EU is all about, which is the centralization of power, the EU operates in a very dictatorial fashion, which is why the British people decided to leave the European Union through Brexit, and they declared their sovereignty and self-determination. I expect more countries will follow in the coming decades, and I think clearly Italian voters have had enough of the European Union, and they want their own national sovereignty and self-determination. They don't want to listen to lectures from EU bureaucrats who have zero respect actually for democracy. That's a very unhealthy state of affairs in the EU when EU officials do not respect the sovereignty of individual European nation states.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah. Okay, now speaking of other European lady leaders, I wanted to ask you, Prime Minister Liz Truss officially began her tenure as Prime Minister. I know that it hasn't been long enough to really give a proper grade, but I just wanted to get your take on how she's doing so far.
Well, I think she's off to a flying start, and she's implemented a series of tax cuts, the biggest tax cuts since 1972, £45 billion worth of tax cuts, actually. So this is a big move by the Conservative government. I think they're taking the right measures. They've also lifted the ban on fracking as well, so they're introducing a new energy policy as well to make Britain energy self-sufficient. This is a very Thatcherite Conservative government in place. I think it's a significant improvement over previous Conservative governments that we've had in the UK over the course of the last decade or so. And so I think Britain's moving in the right direction with Liz Truss. So full marks to her so far.
Yeah. What's real quick, we got about 40 seconds left now. What's the most important thing to be watching in Great Britain the next 30 to 60 days? Big transitions to King Charles, Prime Minister Truss. What should we be watching?
Yeah, great question there, John. So certainly, of course, we have a new king, King Charles III. The coronation date has not been set. Liz Truss actually speaks at the Conservative Party conference next week on Wednesday in Birmingham, and that's her first big speech as the Prime Minister. So everyone's going to be watching that in the UK. And I think that the big question is how the British government is going to deal with the immediate energy crisis that's facing the country, soaring inflation. So a lot of challenges for the UK. But I think Truss will weather the storm and will do very well as long as she advances Thatcherite policies that Margaret Thatcher would have advanced.
I had a feeling you would endorse those types of policies. And regardless of when the coronation is, I know Westminster utilizes a lot of candlelight, and with the power bills up 166%, that might have to be the only way that it's lit for the coronation. Niall Gardner, it was wonderful to have you on here again. Thank you so much for figuratively flying across the pond to be with us today. When we come back, John and I will bring you the latest headlines and recap some of our conversations. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, everybody, for the finale of our show. Amanda, what an extraordinary show today. A lot of big thoughts, a lot of big ideas. I want to start where we finished the last segment, the boomerang going across EU. I think Italy is just one of many chips that are going to fall. A rejection of elitism, a rejection of liberalism in one of the most liberal continents in the world. Now, I think really hit that on the head. Your thoughts about what we should take from the Italian Prime Minister's victory this week?
Yeah, and it only took energy prices doubling, almost tripling. First we saw this happen in Sweden, a rejection of leftist, progressive, as I would say, regressive policies, and now we are seeing it in Italy. And, Macron has survived a few referendums on his leadership, and I think that he might have survived the last one. I think that the next time around that the good folks of France, people who helped us out in obtaining our divorce from Great Britain, I think that they are probably going to maybe give the boot to Emmanuel Macron. I'm very happy to see it going in this direction for a number of reasons. Number one, because of just humanitarian reasons. I don't want to see these people have dark winters, as Angela Merkel suggested, but also because typically you see a lot of these types of things that happen in Europe reach our shores about 6 to 8 months later. And I really don't want us experiencing energy crises and having these dark winters and expensive winters. I just don't want to see that for our own country. And John, I wanted to chuckle with you about something that Alan Dershowitz said. First of all, I have to say I'm very jealous that he is going to opening night at the Metropolitan Opera, but good for him. But one of the things that he spoke, I don't actually know which show is first up in their season. But anyway, he was talking about this big brother element of tracking us places. And he said, I don't want the government to know where I'm going, who I'm going with. It's frankly none of their business. And I was laughing because I recently got a new Apple Watch, and so many of the new things about it that Apple advertises, an ECG monitor, cycle tracking, temperature tracking, it was going down the list, enabling all the privacy things.
And I
turned them. I know, and blood oxygen, and I turned them all off. And my husband was like, "Why did you even bother getting one?" And I said, "Because I just want to know my steps, and I like to ride my bicycle, and I like to, have that for fitness tracking. But otherwise, I'm with Alan. Everything is just getting to be way too big brother for my taste."
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. It's we're living in very dangerous times because the guardrails that we had for most of the last half century of civil liberties have been obliterated, both by ignorance, sometimes by just excessive government action. But we're living in really difficult times. Now, Amanda, you can remember this in the summer. Everybody wanted to be Joe Manchin's friend. Remember? Democrats recording him. Mitch McConnell was recording him. He was called the most powerful guy in Washington. Well, how fast the mighty have fallen. Today, Joe Manchin can't find anybody to back him up. This afternoon, we have a story breaking on Just the News. Joe Manchin asked Schumer to get rid of that permitting plan. That was his big incentive for signing on to the reduced Build Back Better failed plan. Joe Manchin ends up the year as a big political loser. The left and the right both rejecting him. He turned out not to be the power broker everybody thought he was going to be. Your thoughts on that one?
Well, Washington is known for many things, and betrayal is probably chief among them. Sometimes you get burned when you actually trust people on Capitol Hill. I know that oftentimes I seem partisan, but I typically exist in the thought catalog that if you are a long-term serving politician, regardless of whether you are a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian or Green Party or whoever, it's got to be at least a little bit of corruption in you and some of this backstabbing, and it's on full display. But it happens every time there is a bill considered on the floor. There is some level of backstabbing that takes place.
Yeah, listen, there's a great moral to this story, which is Joe Manchin represents the people of West Virginia. The people of West Virginia didn't want Build Back Better. He tried to make some big deal, and it came back to boomerang at him. I think our founding fathers wanted our representatives here in Washington to represent the will of the people, not to represent the will of the elitists in one party or the other. And this may be one of the more painful lessons that come from this. Making backroom deals in Washington that don't have the blessing of your constituents, probably not a good long-term political strategy for folks. Real quickly, tomorrow, Amanda, we're going to have an amazing story. We've been talking about Agent Stephen Friend all week, the whistleblower, suspended, the man who had the courage to speak up about abuses. We've been calling, Natalia Mittelstadt, our great colleague here at Just the News, been calling FBI experts all around the country, former agents, current agents, people like the former agent who led the Unabomber case. They all have grave concerns about what Steve Friend has brought to light. They don't recognize the bureau they used to work in. We're going to have a great story with some of the more famous voices in all of the FBI tomorrow morning. Think about, there's the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski right there. The agent that put that man in prison, he didn't need a tactical team or a SWAT team to make that arrest. Now we're using him to arrest political speech offenders with misdemeanors. Pretty interesting to see the rank and file, the historical alumni of the FBI coming out and calling out their agency. That could be a fun story tomorrow.
Yeah, that's going to be an incredible piece that she puts out, and I'll be looking forward to that. Let's round things off with a conversation about the border. I am also looking forward to Congressman Andy Biggs' documentary out Thursday and then available to the public called Alien Invasion. That's going to be another great one. And speaking of border stuff, there's something special happening tomorrow night, John.
That's right. Tomorrow night, we're going to preempt our regular program. We have a special, the open border on the ballot, an incredible discussion with Homeland Security, former Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf, several of the candidates who are running to fix the border, Blake Masters among them, some of the Texas candidates. A great discussion. There's no doubt, no matter what the Democrats say, the open border is on the ballot. It's probably going to be one of the driving forces in some of these key battleground states. So we'll have that tomorrow night. And then, Amanda, we'll get back together Thursday, pick up the conversation right where we left off right here. I'm going to miss you tomorrow, but we'll be back on Thursday. Can't wait to do that. Folks, thanks for tuning in. A great honor to always have you as part of our live part of our audience. We'll be back here Thursday night, 6 p.m. tomorrow night. Special. Don't miss both.